Welcome back. Well, the author of today's book says his story is kind of like the small box he kept as a boy that was full of bits and pieces of his boyhood summers. And he has drawn on those memories to create a story. Now, it's different than his experiences, but he's plowed into his book some of those events. So let's read and see what he's done. The Raft, written and illustrated by Jim LaMarche. Jim was born in Wisconsin. He admits he wasn't one of those kids with a clear vision of the future. As a child, he thought he might grow up to be a magician, a downhill ski racer, or Davy Crockett. And although he started his studies at the University of Wisconsin as a biology major, he graduated with a degree in art. After college, he worked for Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program, creating teaching materials for Native American tribes in North Dakota. It was a great job, but he explains that since he had few co-workers, he had the chance to involve himself in many aspects of publishing: graphic design, writing, taking photographs, creating illustrations. It was then that I slowly realized that it might be possible for me to make a living at art. He now became an illustrator of children's books. "There's nobody to play with," I complained. "She doesn't even have a TV." Dad grinned. "Well, she's not your normal kind of grandma, I guess. She calls herself a river rat." He chuckled. "But I promise she'll find plenty for you to do." "And I can't take you with me this summer, Nikki. There'll be no kids there, and I'll be spending all my time at the plant." I felt tears starting again, but I blinked hard and looked out the window. That afternoon, I stood in Grandma's yard and watched my dad drive away. Dust rose up behind our car as it disappeared into the pines. "Well, we can't stand here all summer," said Grandma. "Come on, Nicky. It's time for supper." "Honey or maple syrup on your cornbread?" Grandma asked. "I don't like cornbread," I mumbled, poking my finger into the syrup pitcher when she wasn't looking. "If you're going to do that, you better wash up first," she said. She had eyes in the back of her head. "Bathroom's through there." I pushed the doorway curtain aside and walked into what would have been a living room in anyone else's house. Books were scattered everywhere, on the tables, on the chairs, even on the floor. 3 of the walls were cluttered with sketches and stuffed fish and charts of the river. Several fishing poles hung from the 4th with a tackle box, a snorkel, and a mask on the floor beneath them. It looked like a river rat's workroom, all right, except that in the middle of everything was a half-finished carving of a bear. "Been carving that old fellow for years," Grandma called from the kitchen. "The real one hangs out at the dump. Now come get your supper before I feed it to him." Dad was right. Grandma found plenty for me to do. In the morning, I stacked firewood, then helped her clean out the rain gutters and change the spark plugs on her truck. The afternoon was almost over when she handed me a cane pole, a bobber, and some red worms. "Fish fry tonight," she said, showing me how to bait the hook. "That river's full of fat bluegills. Drop your line near the lily pads and you'll find 'em." Down at the dock, I looked things over. The lily pads were too close to shore. There couldn't be fish there. I walked to the end of the dock and threw my line out as far as I could. Then I sat down to wait. and wait. And wait. My bobber never moved. "There's no fish in this stupid river," I said out loud, disgusted. We had hamburgers for supper. "Give it another try," said Grandma the next evening. "I bet you catch something." Don't count on it, I thought, as I headed back to the dock. I threw my line in the water, and then I stretched out on the dock to wait. I must have fallen asleep because I was awakened by loud chirping and chattering. I sat up and looked around. A flock of birds was moving toward me along the river, hovering over something floating on the water. It drifted downstream closer and closer, until finally it bumped up against the dock. Although it was covered with leaves and branches, now I could tell that it was a raft. What was it doing, floating down the river by itself, I wondered. I reached down and pushed some of the leaves aside. Beneath them was a drawing of a rabbit. It looked like those ancient cave paintings I'd seen in books. Just outlines, but wild and fast and free. I cleaned away more leaves, and it was like finding presents under the Christmas tree. A bear, a fox, a raccoon, all with the wild look of the rabbit. Who had drawn them, I wondered? Where had the raft come from? I ran up to the cottage. Grandma was on the porch reading. "Do you have some rope I can use?" I asked. "In the shed, hon," she said. "Help yourself." She didn't ask me what I needed it for, and I decided not to tell her yet. I pushed the raft into the reeds along the river's edge and then tied it to the dock so it wouldn't drift away. All the while, birds flew over my head, every now and then swooping down to the raft as if it were a friend. A crane waded through the reeds to it. A turtle swam up from the bottom of the river. The moon had risen yellow over the river by the time I went up to the cottage to go to bed. I was already down at the dock the next morning when Grandma appeared with a life jacket and a long pole. She didn't seem surprised by the raft at all, or by the animal pictures all over it. "How did you know?" I started. "Let's go," Grandma interrupted, tossing me the life jacket and stepping onto the raft. She pushed the pole hard into the river bottom, and we moved smoothly into the current. "Your turn," she said after a few minutes. She showed me how to hold the pole and push, and I pulled us to the middle of the river. Even there, the water wasn't over my head. We pulled the raft up the river and then let it slowly drift back down. The birds kept us company the whole time, soaring, swooping, singing. Some even landed on the raft and rode with us for a while. Hitchhikers, Grandma called them. After that, I had little time for anything but the raft. I raced through whatever chores there were, then ran down to the dock, wondering what animals I'd see that day. It wasn't just birds that the raft attracted. One morning, 3 raccoons followed me along the shore. Another time, a turtle climbed on board and spent the morning sunning itself. And one afternoon, I saw a family of foxes slip through the trees along the river. When the weather turned too hot and sticky to sleep indoors, Grandma helped me put up a small tent on the raft. I lay on top of the cool sheets and read comic books by flashlight until I fell asleep. One night, a noise woke me up. There in the moonlight stood a huge buck. He looked right at me, then lowered his head to drink, as if I wasn't there at all. I found Grandma the next morning working on her bear carving. "Do you have some extra paper I could draw on?" I asked her. She brought out a big sketch pad and a pouch filled with thick pencils and crayons. "I've been saving these just for you," she said. Better take these too." She held out a snorkel and a mask. Never know when they might come in handy on a raft. The sun was hot that afternoon, so I pulled into the shade of a willow and then waited to see what animals the raft would bring. It wasn't long before a great blue heron whooshed down with a crayfish in its bill. I grabbed a pencil and began to sketch. I felt invisible as the bird calmly ate its lunch right in front of me. Then it preened its feathers, looked back up the river, and flew off. That night, I showed my drawing to Grandma. "Not bad," she said, "not bad at all." And then she tacked it on the wall on top of one of her own sketches. One day, I poled upriver farther than I'd ever been. Near a clump of tall cattails, I startled an otter family. They dove underwater, but as with the other animals, the raft seemed to calm them down. Soon, they were playing all around me. Grandma had been right about the mask and snorkel coming in handy. I slipped them on and then hung my head over the raft and watched the otters play, chasing fish, chasing each other, sometimes just chasing their own tails. I kept very still, but they didn't seem to mind me watching. They played keep-away with a small stone, then tug-of-war with a piece of rope. It was like they were showing off for me. They even let me feed them right out of my hand. Some mornings Grandma would make a bag full of sandwiches and a thermos of icy lemonade, and then we'd put on our bathing suits, grab some towels, a long chair, and an inner tube, and pole upriver to her favorite swimming spot. "I've come swimming here since I was a girl," she told me as we tied the raft to an old dock. "The Marshalls used to live here, all 10 of them. What a herd of wild animals we were." While Grandma watched from the inner tube, I practiced my flying cannonballs. Then we'd eat our lunch, and she'd tell me stories about growing up on the river. My favorite was of the time she found a small black pearl inside a river clam. "I still have it," she said. Somehow, on the river, it seemed like summer would never end. But of course, it did. On my last day, I got up extra early and crept down to the dock. The air was cool, and a low, pearly fog hung over the river. I untied the raft and quietly drifted downstream. Ahead of me, through the fog, I saw 2 deer moving across the river, a doe and her fawn. When they reached the shore, the doe leaped easily up the steep bank and then turned to wait for her baby. But the fawn was in trouble. It kept slipping down the muddy bank. The doe returned to the water to help, but the more the fawn struggled, the deeper it got stuck in the mud. I pushed off the river bottom and drove the raft hard onto the muddy bank, startling the doe. And then I dropped into the water. I was ankle deep in mud. "You're okay," I whispered to the fawn, praying that the raft would calm it. "I won't hurt you." Gradually, the fawn stopped struggling, as if it understood that I was there to help. I put my arms around it and pulled. It barely moved. I pulled again, then again. Slowly, the fawn eased out of the mud, and finally it was free. Carefully, I carried the fawn up the bank to its mother. Then, quietly, I returned to the raft. From there, I watched the doe nuzzle and clean her baby, and I knew what I had to do. I pulled the stub of a crayon from my pocket and drew the fawn in all its wildness onto the old gray boards of the raft. When I had finished, I knew it was just right. After supper, I showed Grandma my drawing of the fawn and told her my story. "It's perfect," she said, "but we need to do one more thing." She hurried up to the cottage. When she came back, she had tubes of oil paint and 2 brushes. Grandma helped me trace my drawing with the oil paint, which soaked deep into the wood. "That'll keep it," she said. "Now you'll always be a part of the river." "Just like you, Grandma," I told her. "A river rat." Grandma laughed. "Just like me," she agreed. The end. Like Nicky in this book, Jim LaMarche spent summers with his grandparents at a cottage in the North Woods. His grandma was a self-taught artist and a fine fryer of perch and bluegill fish. Like Nicky, he found an old raft, and just like Nicky, he discovered the power of drawing, and that eventually turned into his career as an illustrator. This book is about many little things: a summer in the woods, a special grandparent, becoming a river rat, and becoming an artist, and reminding us that a summer with Grandma and no TV won't necessarily turn out the way we thought it would. The Holy Spirit has a way of leading us into adventures that lead us to places we hadn't imagined, but turn out to be wonderful. Come back next week and let's read another story.